I remember having someone in my house, and we were talking about, I'm not even too sure why we were talking about it, and I said, no, so I don't regret it. It was my choice, and it was the right thing to do. What kind of life could I have given my daughter? What kind of life could I have given her? And I remember them looking really shocked and like, really? And I was like, yeah, really, that's it. And it was just a way of drawing a line. No, I can't think about it, because if I go deep. And after they left, I went and sat in the bath and just sobbed my heart out. You know, I wasn't even a Christian at this point, but I was saying, sorry, God, I'm sorry, I'm so, so sorry. Hi, I'm Hayley, and this is my story. I'd say my story starts from when I was a child, because I grew up in quite an abusive home. So abusive men was something that I was quite used to. When I was a teenager, my mum left the abusive marriage that we'd been living in, and I found myself actually living with an uncle. And he was a really great guy, but not really prepared for fathering a rebellious teenage girl who had been through all of that already. So I found myself mixing with the wrong people, staying out too late, that kind of thing, kind of maybe behaving older than I should have done. I was smoking, drinking. I was about 14, I think, when I moved there. And so I was 14 or 15 when I met someone who was older than me, so about 5-6 years older than me, at a party at their house. We struck up what you might call a relationship. In my mind, it was certainly a relationship. I think I was so, my self-esteem was quite low, so I was looking for someone to make me feel better about myself, and for a time maybe he did that, but he was seeing many other people at the same time. I don't want to paint that as being the fairy tale picture, because it was far from that. It was very much a coercive relationship right from the start. So he was old enough to know better, and so really you could say that was an abuse that started right there. We were sort of seeing each other for a few months. Just after I turned 16, I found out that I was pregnant. Initially I was quite flawed. I think we have this idea it won't happen to me, and suddenly it did. He wasn't the only one who wasn't happy about it initially. I had some family members were quite vocal that it was a silly thing to have done. I can understand that. That was kind of a normal reaction, but at the same time that immediately put in my mind I'd done a really silly thing. So when something's presented to you as an option to change that thing that you've done, maybe that makes abortion seem more inviting, but nonetheless I was determined that I was going to keep the baby. I moved in with some other relations for a while, and eventually I ended up moving back with my uncle, who unfortunately lived around the corner from this person who I'd been having a sort of relationship with, which gave him the ability really to kind of sink his claws in, if you like, to start really putting the poison in my ears. It's just cells, and I was going to ruin my life, that nobody would support me if I kept the baby, that I would ruin my body was another one, that if I kept the baby that would be it, like I would be ugly, nobody would want to ever be with me again, and What would you do about college is another thing. I was training to be a hairdresser initially at that time. What would I do about that? What would you do for a career? How are you going to afford a baby? I'm not going to support you. I don't want another child. He already had 2 children when we met. So he didn't want another child. Eventually, I had a friend who I'd known from college, and she used to date one of his friends. She started coming around, and in a way it seemed nice at the time, because I didn't really have any friends at that point, and I didn't feel I did. And she started to come around, and she would say things like, why would I force him to be a dad when he doesn't want to be? How could I have a baby that he doesn't want? That the right thing to do would be to have an abortion, that I should have an abortion. It would, it'd be better for me. So I really had that kind of 2-pronged from both of them, from him, who I was, I think at that time, completely emotionally dependent on, even though he had been very abusive and was seeing many other people, and at that point was leaving me under no illusion that I didn't really mean anything to him. I was just being used for one thing. I was still completely emotionally dependent on him, and from this person who I thought was my only friend at that time was really coming from her and from family, even though they'd started to sort of change their minds, if you like, and they'd started to be that bit more supportive. It was still, I felt like I was a disappointment to them. I'd done the wrong thing. I booked and cancelled my appointment to have the abortion twice before I finally went. And then on my final time, the doctor said to me, if I left it any longer, then I would be too far gone to go to the abortion centre that was nearest my home. I would have to travel much further. It would be considered a later term abortion. I was 12 weeks when I had the abortion. I hadn't had a scan or anything like that. So this guy had said to me I needed to borrow £10 off of my uncle to put in for fuel, because he had no fuel. And then him and his friend would take me to the abortion clinic. I had promises of, I'll support you if you have the abortion. If you have the abortion, I will support you through that, and everything will be fine. But I really felt if I kept the baby, then I was on my own. So I went with them. They drove me to the abortion clinic and dropped me off outside. And I was told that if I didn't have the abortion, I had no way home. So I was 16 on my own in the city that was nearest to my home. I went in. Oh, sorry. I think I'm crying. So, it was a long time ago now. My daughter would have been 22 this year. So it's quite a lot to remember. But there's certain things that stand out to me. And I remember being in the waiting room. I remember the colour of the chairs. I remember how cold they were. I remember being told that I needed to see a counsellor before I went in, and I went in and sat with the counsellor. I didn't look at her. I kept my head down, and I told her I couldn't speak to her because if I did, I would change my mind, and that he would be angry with me if I changed my mind. I can't change my mind. So she signed the papers and sent me back to the waiting room. I sat there for a while. The next thing I remember is the doctor coming and giving me like a pessary to put inside of me, a bit like a tampon applicator. And it was very cold. I kind of get that now though. I understand, the job that they're doing is so hard. How could you do that job and not grow quite cold and quite bitter towards the people who are getting you to, in a way, well, to do their dirty work, in a sense. I kind of get it now. But I felt very alone. And he says, once I'd done it, once I'd put them inside me, that was it. There's no going back. And that after, it was like 20 minutes or so, that I would start to feel cramps. So I took them, reassured myself I was doing the right thing, and done it. I went back to the waiting room, and after a while I did start to feel cramps. I remember they came to get me. I don't remember even putting on a gown, but I must have done at some point in there. But I remember being in the operating theatre. The abortionists at the end of the bed with the machine. I had somebody on this side. I think they were doing the anaesthetic, and there was a nurse beside me, and I remember her holding my hand and stroking my hair just like you would a child. I was a child, really. It's understandable. She was stroking my hair, and I was just sobbing and sobbing. And she said to me, "It's okay. It's going to be okay." The last thing that I said was, "No, it's not. It's never going to be okay again." And then I woke up, and I was in the recovery room. There was, like being in any other hospital ward, I suppose, there was beds either side of the room. Lots of women. I remember most, like, they looked older than me. I remember being very young in there. And I pretty much jumped off the bed. I think the first thing I said, well, that's that done. Right, what have I got to do now? And I think I was in complete shock. And I remember just hoping, like, it wouldn't have worked, or maybe they wouldn't have done it. Maybe, something. I don't know, it's almost like I detached myself from the consequence of what it was. It was bizarre, really, completely bizarre. And they, after I got dressed, took me out back to the waiting room that I was in when I initially came in, and I sat there for hours. I was the last one to leave. I remember going to the bathroom, to the toilet, and just so much blood and clots, and just thinking there's no way, like, it sounds odd, I know, and people will think I'm mad, but a part of me was hoping it hadn't worked. And I just remember looking and thinking, there's no way it hasn't worked. That's it, it's done. What have I done? I want my baby back. I just want my baby back. Yeah, so I sat there for a while, a long time. I remember the nurses kind of walking around now and again, looking at me, like, really concerned. Eventually, he did come and pick me up. Him and his friend. Turned out he'd been off with yet another girl while I'd been in there. So he was really worth the loss of my child. We drove home. I sat in the back and said, "Are you all right?" No, I'm in pain. And he told me I was lying. I wasn't in pain. I was just saying that for attention. And I'd probably heard a friend say that. Someone that we knew had an abortion a few months before. It's just because she said that. So I was trying so hard not to cry all the way home. We went back to his house. And I started to cry. I just couldn't hold it in any longer. I started to cry. And he said to me, "If you're going to cry, you're no good to me." I was told to go home. So I I walked home and just broke, completely broke. I remember screaming, crying. It wasn't just a normal cry, it was it was wailing, sobbing, screaming, crying, and just pleading with God. It wouldn't have worked. And I just knew I just desperately wanted to change what I'd done. I just desperately wanted my baby back, and there was nothing I could do about it. I remember I have a pot of pills in my room. There's so many times over the coming months that I just wanted to take my own life. I was that depressed, that traumatised. I just wanted to end it all, so at least that way I can maybe get my baby back. I know it sounds totally bonkers. It was like there was a hole, it was like a piece of my soul had just been ripped away, and I just desperately needed to get it back. The next day I called him. I just experienced how awful I was feeling. So I'd had the promises of, I'll support you if you have the abortion. He called me a murdering bee, and said that he never wanted to see me again, and that nobody would ever want to talk to me again because I was just a murdering bee. I think after I pretty much spent a long time just getting drunk and staring out of a window, I just completely went off the rails, completely. I don't think I stopped going off the rails really, not until I found God, maybe even a couple of years ago. And my husband, he mended me as much as he could, but there was the trauma that I'd suffered was so deep, only God could fix that. No human could ever possibly fix that. It had to come from God. I had my first then child after Chelsea, after the loss of Chelsea. When I was 18 when I fell pregnant with Ebony, and I think in a way I thought it would almost fill a void. I don't want to say a replacement. I knew she would never replace Chelsea, but it almost felt like maybe it would fix something. But it really didn't. I remember going for I went for a scan at 8 weeks with my eldest daughter, and because I'd been spotting, I'd been bleeding, and to be honest, I thought maybe that was punishment. Maybe I was going to have a miscarriage and it would be punishment. So we went and had this scan, and 8 weeks she was curling up in a ball and throwing herself back, and she had a heartbeat, and she was a little baby. And as much as it was really lovely to see her on the screen, see that she was healthy, and there was that realisation that I was 12 weeks when I had the abortion. And I'm sure if I'd seen a scan, if I'd known, it would have been a lot harder for me to be swayed. It would have been harder for me to change my mind. It would have been harder for him to have convinced me to abort my baby, because I would have known she was a baby. She wasn't just cells. And even more, there was that realisation that actually I had ended the life of my child. So as much as I was excited for Ebony, it brought a whole new level of grief for Chelsea. As much as I loved my children, I felt I wasn't really able to bond with them properly. The trauma from the abortion, I think people think it's just there and it goes. It doesn't. It lives with you. and it's like it infects everything. I couldn't have a proper relationship. I gravitated to completely the wrong people. I have 4 children, 4 different dads, all long-term relationships, but just completely the wrong people. And I was just so lost. I think I had no self-worth at all. The enemy has this really good way of leading you into doing really awful things, making you think that they're okay to do, and then condemning you for it. And following Jesus, I found, yes, there's conviction for what I'd done an awful thing, and there is conviction, but it's conviction given with love, just as a parent gives to their child when they do wrong. He hates the sin, he doesn't hate the sinner. Eventually I met my youngest's dad, and fortunately he was a good guy. I feel like even though I wasn't following God at that time, he brought him into my life, because he really did help me to put things back together again. So I gave my life to Jesus in 2019, and there was circumstance after circumstance I felt that God really sort of led me into, and doors that he opened up, and that led me to reach out and go to a place called Rachel's Vineyard. I prayed and I asked God to show me who my child would have been. And in a moment of just sitting in quiet prayer, the only way I could really explain it was like a dream. It was like physically I was still there, but I was somewhere else. It was like a dream, and I had the most incredible image of Chelsea. She was, I'd say, about 6, and she looked so much like me as a child, and at the same time kind of like a little bit of each of my other children, and just totally herself, but at the same time with those similarities. And she was playing in a meadow, and there was other children there, and just that feeling of peace. It was almost like she was conveying to me I was forgiven, and that she was okay, that she was playing quite happily in the meadow with other children, and that she would be waiting there for me. I think when we consider whether or not it should be a woman's choice, it's really important to actually think about the research that's been done. I study psychology. I'm a bit of a research buff. I've done a lot of digging, a lot of research in myself, and there is a wealth of information out there about the trauma that women and girls, I was a girl, really, I should have been protected from that trauma. Women aren't just not told the trauma that they're going to suffer, it's actively hidden. And it shouldn't be allowed, it should never be allowed. If you go for anything, if you even are going to have a tooth pulled, you are told all of the risks, you are told even the absolute worst case scenario. We don't want to know, we don't want to hear it, we have to have the tooth pulled, but we're still told. And yet when you go for an abortion, where you're ending your child's life, you're not warned, you're not told actually, this is the percentage of women who will be suicidal. This is a percentage of women who will struggle with bonding with their children that they have later down the line. This is the percentage of women who never get to try again, who never get that chance again. We're not told that, and it should be absolutely out there for everyone to know. I think so many of the women that are being listened to, the ones that are shouting, it's my body, my choice, many of them are probably in that trauma, in that same space that I was at that time. And you're not seeing the reality, you're not seeing the truth. You're just seeing the trauma, you're seeing the mask that women put on in order to kind of almost take it back a little bit. And it's really sad that that is what's being listened to rather than all of the evidence that there is, not just for the humanity of the unborn child, not just there is so much evidence in that area that should be listened to. But even if you completely ignore the humanity of the unborn child, even if you completely eliminate that, just looking on its own at the trauma that women go through. I've seen a post share that said, I'm not pro killing babies, but I'm pro this woman who's had this happen, and I'm pro this woman who's had that happen. And I remember reading through it, and I had to sit on my hands and not reply. Because for every single one, I was like, no, support her, support her, support her. Don't offer let's end your child's life, that, oh, it's just a quick course correction. No, it's not. You're adding trauma on top of trauma. That doesn't fix the original trauma. It doesn't take it away. So, oh, well, financially, it might make sense. What? To anyone who may see this, any girl, any woman who may be finding themselves in the situation that I was in fact, if I could go back and I could say this to myself, it would be that the love of a mother for their child is like no other love. And if somebody is trying to pressurize you into making such a decision, they don't love you. They are not worth your time of day at all. You are strong and you can do it. And actually there is so much support now, and there are so many different organisations that are so willing, in fact desiring, to help you to keep your child. Even if you were to keep your child and you felt like you weren't in that position, giving your child that life is so valuable. Even if they were to be adopted into a loving family, I know people who have been adopted and they are in loving families, and I'm sure they would much rather the life that they have had with a loving family than they were never here at all. I myself, my mum was a child really. She was 14 when she fell pregnant with me. She was 15 when she had me. And I am so, so grateful that she was strong and she chose life for me. And I would like to think, and I don't think she would say I'm wrong, she's very grateful too, as she has me, and I'm wonderful, and her grandchildren through me. And yes, there are times when it has been hard. I didn't say it's always going to be easy, but life is hard. Even when you have a child when you're older and people think that you've got everything together, there's still challenges, there's still struggles. But it's so worth it. When you end your child's life, when you go through that abortion, it doesn't rewrite what's happened. It doesn't rewrite history. You still had that child, and that child's life ended. So you still have that child in your life, but they're not there. I hope that makes sense. It's the burden that you carry from ending your child's life is so much heavier than any burden you will carry with your child in your life, because it's completely outweighed by the love and the joy that child brings to you. Completely outweighed.